Fredericton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I recently celebrated 1 year since I became an MP. In my role, I've had the incredible opportunity to learn every day. I listen to people, organizations, and advocates. And the discussion around medical assistance in dying is truly about listening. Today, I will add my voice to an issue that affects us all. Talking about death and dying is still taboo in our society, yet each of us must face it, not only for ourselves, but for the ones we love. This conversation does not come easy, but for those whose time is closer than others, we owe it to them to listen and to act in passing this bill. The debate on C7 has been passionate, emotional, and raw, rightly so. And I wish to congratulate and offer my gratitude to each member of this House for their efforts on behalf of their constituents, family members, and friends. Each of us has been speaking with our community members to learn their thoughts and hear their stories. Human agency has been on display, and the speeches before this House have shown professionalism and integrity with a deep commitment to the fundamental rights of Canadians. Sometimes we need a reminder that our Constitution is a beautiful thing. It is the crux of why I'm so proud to be Canadian and why I feel so honored to have the privilege to defend and uphold the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. I remember first learning in depth about the Charter as a grade 11 student. I remember the way it made me feel, the way it made me think about our life and our interactions with one another, the empowerment that it brought into focus. It was right around this time that I knew I wanted to someday be involved in politics. Well, that seems like ages ago. It was only recently that I learned about the urgency in amending our laws on the issues within the legislation on medical assistance in dying specifically and how it interacts with the Charter. I sat with it without lived experience, and I thought of many what-if situations, various scenarios and scary predicaments that I wouldn't want to face for the risk of also overstepping constitutional rights if mistakes were made. I heard some of these same concerns from many stakeholders, from those that are concerned about how this would impact people living with disabilities or with suicidal ideation. I have listened to those concerns and filtered this legislation through those important lenses. While I know some of these people may still disagree with me, I want them to know that I am confident this legislation strikes a balance that will not have the impact they fear. I also sought out opportunities to speak to individuals who had a personal connection to this legislation. And as it turns out, many people are willing to discuss their wish for dignity in dying, as well as their concerns about the current process and these proposed amendments. These individuals shared with me their efforts to pursue their right to bodily autonomy in their final moments on Earth. In the powerful conversations I had, the specific issues of advanced requests, mental competency, as well as the discretionary role of a foreseeable death were the exact hurdles to the peace of mind that would come with having control over their own death, final control over the pain. There are Canadians right now who are suffering intolerably and enduringly, who already have do not resuscitate orders, who have made final wills and testaments and prepaid for funeral arrangements. They have demonstrated their competence in preparing for death. They should be trusted to make a decision about the nature of their own death as well. If we rob them of this opportunity, then we have failed them. We have allowed our laws to overstep into bodily integrity and autonomy, an infringement of our protected right to security of the person. I also want to address the language of assisted suicide or euthanasia. Our words are important, and it is important to remember that this bill is to amend a bill on medical assistance in dying. We know that a medical prognosis is the safeguard. It is the authoritative layer that protects individuals who are vulnerable. The reality of the situation facing real Canadians is that co-occurring mental and physical illness is extremely common and should not be a barrier to anyone's right to bodily autonomy at the end of their life. Severe depression often accompanies other medical illnesses and is a high rate of occurrence among persons with disabilities. As a further example, an individual may be bipolar and later develop terminal cancer in their life. This pre-existing condition, likely to flare up in such a stressful time, cannot be the reason to deny the will of an individual to determine their final moments. In conclusion, I remain firm that mental illness in Canada requires rapid access to effective mental health services, including in-person counseling and access to psychiatrists where necessary, as well as wraparound community supports. That we need to set national standards for long-term care to ensure that the facilities intended to house older adults are providing a quality of life that keeps them healthy and active throughout their elder years. That we need to invest in robust palliative care to ensure there is dignity in living, even through those final difficult days. I think of Hospice Fredericton and the peaceful, beautiful experience people and their families have in that environment. The option to welcome death peacefully should be an option for those that want it. That we must also value and listen to Canadians with disabilities and their advocates. We can do all of these things, Mr. Speaker, and still pass this bill. I do not believe that MAID introduces the risk that some patients will be forced to receive this procedure against their wishes. There are preventative measures capable of eliminating this risk. I do believe that my duty to uphold the Charter of Rights and Freedoms means passing legislation like this to uphold security of the person for all Canadians at all moments during their lives. I will be proudly voting for this legislation. This is about justice. It is about empathy. It is about choosing to respect one's wishes and not interfering in that decision. And it's about giving peace of mind to people so that the final chapter in their life can be written in confidence and their story can be concluded according to their own volition. Thank you very much.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is, in fact, very important legislation, which, in essence, comes out of a court ruling, and you'll find that even the debate really began on this issue in terms of the House after the last federal election, again by a Supreme Court ruling. And I think that the overall acceptance and just listening to this many different speeches on this, it's actually been very touching in terms of, I would suspect it will receive unanimous support. At least I'm hopeful that it'll receive unanimous support. But a part of that debate, in listening to it, a lot of members are talking about other issues that are related. For example, the importance of palliative care and how it is that we need to do more in that area of palliative care. And to that extent, I would ask my colleague what her thoughts are in terms of how important it is for the federal government to be working with provincial governments in dealing with some of the issues that we have before us, including the issue of palliative care.
Honourable Member for Fredericton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my honourable colleague for that important question. And you know what, it just makes me think about, where I'm at in my life, and I think about what the future could possibly hold. And I know that it really comes down to that choice. I hope that at that point in my life that there is effective palliative care to ensure that I have the choice to live with dignity right to the end, if that's what I so choose, if that's what's best for me as an individual. So absolutely, we need to do far more, and we need to collaborate with our provincial counterparts. This is a huge piece of why I also advocate for an increased health transfer for our Atlantic provinces, because we know we have an aging population. We know this is an issue we must confront, but absolutely, this is the other piece, is to ensure the dignity in dying as well. So I really appreciate kind of the nuanced question. Thank you.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Member for Sarnia-Lambton.
Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank my colleague across the way for a great speech. And I want to talk a little bit more about palliative care. Obviously, I'm a passionate advocate, but even more recently, my mother passed away this past week. And she was fortunate enough to have excellent palliative care, as we do in Sarnia-Lambton. And so the government had made a good beginning on the palliative care framework and starting down that path, but really has not really put a lot of muscle in it since then, and especially with the COVID pandemic and so many people that are palliative at the end, we need to have that to ensure that people can make that choice. And so I wondered if the member could share her thoughts on what the government ought to do to boost their efforts in this area.
Honourable Member for Fredericton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you so much for that question, and my condolences to you and your family on your loss. And I mean, absolutely. So it just continues with what I've been saying, but I think it's important for us as opposition members as well to continue to hold the government accountable on some of these promises and initiatives. We hear great things coming out of some of the speeches opposite the throne speech as an example, but we need to see the actions and the legislation that correlates. And I will certainly do all I can to push for better palliative care across this country. And so I so appreciate that. It's such an important question. Thank you very much.
We have time for one short question and response. L'honorable député.
The honourable member for Abitibi-Témiscamingue. Thank you. I'd like to thank my colleague from Fredericton for her speech. My question is very simple. What components would she like to add to this bill? Does it go far enough, in her opinion? What could be enhanced to improve the quality of life of people? Thank you.
For Fredericton.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague.
The key issues that's been brought forward by constituents is the concept of remedial mental illness and how this might impact their ability to follow through with their wishes. And so, as an advocate for mental health supports, it's such an important question, and I want to be really careful and clear. But as I mentioned, those co-occurring disorders often exist, and that should not be a reason for someone to not be able to pursue dignity in death from another physical illness that they're experiencing. So it's a very specific issue, and I hope to see that addressed in this legislation change. Thank you very much.
Resuming debate.